Welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartlidge, and I'm passionate about helping you master your animal training skills using the most positive and least intrusive approaches. Here at ATA, we understand that navigating the vast challenges you encounter in training requires a comprehensive base of knowledge and experience. It's common to face obstacles and rough patches on your journey that can leave you feeling overwhelmed and stressed. Therefore, since 2015, we've been on a mission to empower animal training geeks worldwide. We've aided thousands in developing their skills, expanding their knowledge, boosting their confidence, and maximizing their positive impact on all the animal and human learners they work with. We are excited to do the same for you. Simply visit www.atamember.com, join our vibrant community, and geek out with us. And of course, in the meantime, enjoy this free podcast episode as we explore new ways to help you supercharge your training skills, grow your knowledge, and build your confidence, so that you can craft a life that positively impacts every learner you encounter. But we will start today's episode where I'll be having a conversation with one Kim Palermo. Kim, CPDTKA, is a Certified Control Unleashed Instructor and ACE, Animal-Centered Education Practitioner. She has worked professionally with dogs for over 20 years and has been a lifelong dog owner and sports enthusiast. Kim owns a dog training and dog walking business with her husband near Boston, Massachusetts, and teaches full-time at Fenzi Dog Sports Academy. She is passionate about helping dogs with big feelings and brings compassion and kindness to every animal and person she works with. Kim is dedicated to helping others pursue their dreams of training dogs and continues to grow her business through mentorship and opportunity. She mentors for the Control Unleashed Certification Program, the Catch Dog Training Academy, and individual trainers. Kim has spoken at conferences, teaches in-person workshops, and presents within her local community. In her free time, she enjoys hiking, beekeeping, and raising chickens, ducks, turkeys, and guinea hens. So she's secretly a bird nerd at heart. I like her even more now. While dreaming of one day owning a farm. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Kim to the ATA podcast show today. Kim, thanks so much for taking the time to come and hang out with us at Animal Training Academy.
Well, thanks for having me. And yes, definitely a bird dork at heart.
Do you do much any training with the fowl?
I have, yeah. My favorite is when we're like hatching or raising chicks like in our basement. I can go down there every night and do some like clicker training or something. Unfortunately, this spring, I don't have any babies in the basement, or that sounds horrible. Chicks in the basement.
That's potentially my favorite line that anyone's ever said on this podcast show. No babies in the basement this year. Damn it.
But yeah, I do very much enjoy training them.
I take it back. You're starting to freak me out. I know Leslie shared videos of people working with ducks. Is that you?
No, not the ducks. My ducks aren't really eager to learn. I do have a turkey that I train also. Her name is Kevin, but I don't think Leslie uses any of those videos.
And how did she get the name Kevin?
Oh, Kevin is the name of the bird from the Disney movie Up. Have you seen Up?
Is that the one where the house like floats up into the sky?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've watched it with my kids at some point.
Yeah, such a cute movie.
And there's a turkey on there called Kevin. Awesome. I didn't know that.
There's a bird, yeah.
Let's dive straight into the first question today, Kim. For this one, I was hoping you could take the listeners back and share a little bit about your animal training odyssey, about where you first learned about positive reinforcement and share some stories with us from your journey.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I'm kind of the classic animal kid, born loving animals and growing up with a lot of animals. So we can kind of jump past all the childhood stuff. When I was in high school, like I always wanted to become a vet. When I was in high school, I decided I wanted to get into behavior instead. So I went to the University of New Hampshire and I got a degree in zoology. And I did also, the reason why I went to that college, because I'm also a bug dork, and they had an entomology program. So that was kind of my backup plan. But I'm working with dogs instead of spiders. So I worked in the industry, the pet industry, for a long time. I made like peanuts doing that, but I learned a ton and I soaked it all in. My first mentor was Gail Fisher. She was she was at the forefront of clicker training when it first came, and became popular. But when I graduated from college, I ended up just getting a real job. It was a sales job. It was actually in the pet industry, but definitely not anything it wasn't my dream, that was for sure. So after about a year and a half, I got a husband out of it, but that was it. And so I left that job, kind of just worked for my parents for a while. And then I decided to start walking dogs locally. So I put an ad in the newspaper and printed out 100 business cards, and my business Blue Dog was formed. And that was in 2008. And it completely took off. And so I got a lot of hands-on experience working with dogs just by walking them. And I started hiring employees. And by 2011, I opened my first training facility through the business. And that's when I really started getting into training professionally. I learned under Gail Fisher. So I went through her certification program. And I mean, admittedly, I am a crossover trainer. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And so, I did 4-H and stuff. We put, choke chains on the dogs and everything, which I appreciate that I had that experience simply because it helped me understand where I really wanted to go with my career. But it was learning from Gail that switched me over to positive reinforcement training. And so I just kept growing the business, and I became more and more interested in behavior. I had also always done sports with my dogs. So that was kind of another part of what I did. So I was involved. I took a lot of classes through Fancy Dog Sports Academy. And so then in I think it was 2020 or 2021, I learned that Leslie McDevitt had a certification program to become a CU instructor. And so I went through that. And then at the same time, I also met Julie Daniels, who became a very close friend and mentor to me. And so I learned a ton from the two of them. I really enjoy everything that the Control Unleashed program offers. And I just dove into that. So was a CCUI. I also became Julie's teaching assistant through Fancy Dog Sports Academy. And I got to learn so much through her. And then at some point, I'm not sure when, I became interested in free work. So that's animal-centered education based in Tilly Farm in Bath, England, founded by the amazing Sarah Fisher. So I had always been looking for ways to, for me, offering a very natural life for my dogs. Lots of decompression is very important. I love hiking with them, and free work really seemed to embrace that. And in addition to that, I had experienced, when I was a kid, I had a fall and I hurt my head and neck. And so I experienced chronic pain essentially from 10 years onward. And in particular, between 2010 and 2018, I had chronic daily migraines. So I'm very aware of what pain can do to us and how it can influence our behavior. And so I think that was the other reason that drew me towards free work. And so I think it was early last year, I became certified through free work, went through all the modules, and I'm continuing to learn and hopefully getting my next certification soon. So that's kind of my journey. And then as far as what I'm doing now, Unfortunately, my wonderful friend and mentor, Julie Daniels, passed away. And so I started teaching the Control Unleashed classes for Fenzi Dog Sports Academy. So I now work for FDSA full time. I'm still running my local business with my husband, and we have an amazing team. I travel more now. So I speak for, I teach workshops, and I'm going to be in North Carolina for the Control Unleashed conference. And I'm going to be in the Chicago area speaking for Canis. And then just kind of living my life with my dogs and using them as my guinea pigs as I experiment like different ideas and try new things out. So
quite a journey from bugs and dog walking to where you are now. I'm curious. I'm curious. Are you still doing anything in relation to your dorkiness when it comes to bugs?
I may have a collection of some
What do you have?
Spiders and tarantulas. Yeah. Just as pets.
And in terms of their learning as pets of Kim, have you how do you set the environment up for them and provide consequences that might shift their behavior? Do you do any intentional training with them?
I haven't yet, just because of a lack of time. Right now, I'm just focusing on creating very natural environments for them, with like live plants and all that kind of stuff. I do have a few that I can like tong feed. So I'll, feed them directly from tongs. The problem with arachnids, I guess if we're going to call it a problem, is that if I were to just use food as a reward, they eat once, right? They grab their prey and then they sit and eat it for a long time. So discovering how to work around that is going to be one of my challenges. So
yeah, it's a fun one. I don't know many people that come to mind immediately for me anyway that are doing much in that space, with arachnids specifically. But I know we've had content on training snakes who have a similar component to their natural history with regards to feeding. And a fun opportunity to grow, to really challenge and stretch yourself with what reinforcers you're going to use, and what happens when our go-to food is minimized as an available reinforcer with those species. So that's fun. I'm curious for those who are still with us. Half the people have tuned out now because they got freaked out by our talk of tarantulas. But for those that are still with us, and babies in basements, of course. But for those that are still with us, we've got a range of people on that listen to the show, from very experienced trainers to beginners. But I'm just curious to learn, and to speak to those who might be just getting started, and your advice to them about how to get started, because it's such a common question, right? When people learn about training, and through your story, we learned that you got started with dog walking, and maybe share some perspectives from your experience on the benefits or cons, or what you've learned, and if you do it again, would you do it the same way? And how dog training could be a good as somewhere to get started or not.
Yeah. No, I think it was a fantastic. And because I truly think that hands-on experience is the key to learning when it comes to dog training. I also think sports, competing in sports, or even just training for sports or training for tricks, anything, all of that is so useful. But with dog walking, I really got to learn how to work with such different dogs. Like every dog I would walk would have their own temperament and personality and challenges and needs. And I also would run into situations where I'd walk into a house and the dog wasn't comfortable with someone walking into the house. So I had to learn how to troubleshoot that. I actually, for a while, I had this technique for my team. If a dog so sometimes they would let a dog out in a fenced-in backyard, and then the dog wouldn't want to come back in. And now we only have like a half hour with the dog or whatever. So I would tell my team, pretend you just caught a baby bird. Like, go over to the ground and act all like curious and be like, oh my gosh, it's so cute. And inevitably, most dogs will come over and be like, well, what did you find? And then they were able to then engage with the dog and get the dog in. So I just kind of learned a lot of tricks in how to engage with dogs. And then also with dog walking, the challenge is that a lot of these dogs are family dogs that don't get a lot of training. And so, or they don't get any training at all. So in some senses, I'm able to kind of do whatever I want as far as like teaching the dog how to learn and try different skills, but also it's not something that's replicated by the owners. So these are things that, in order for me to see real change and progress, I have to figure out how to work around that. You know, the dog isn't learning these skills the majority of its life when I'm not around, and only the 3 times a week for, you know, a half hour each that I'm at the house. So that was really useful. And I also, at the time, I would bring, I have 5 dogs right now. I grew up with rough collies. And at the time when I started my business, I had 2 rough collies, Elsa and Reese, and they would come with me often on walks. And so I got to observe a lot of dog body language and communication. I also saw how a confident, socially savvy dog could support a dog. Often, if I had a dog that was nervous about coming over to me, I would bring Elsa inside the house and she would help the dog warm up. And then I would be able to make friends with the dog that way. So I learned a lot through that. I think for me, I really enjoy observation. If we go back to my chickens, when I was a little girl, I would just sit in the chicken pen for hours on end, just observing the chickens and ducks and learning how they communicate. And, you know, there wasn't really any sort of end goal other than I was curious to learn how, you know, more about them. And so dog walking allowed me to continue to observe. And then even more so once I got into training and we run group classes, I had some trainers who work for me and I would just kind of sit back and watch. And I got to see how a dog would respond, like if a handler walked into them, walked towards them as they cued them to sit, versus if the handler stayed still, and like these little things that I picked up on, and how it could influence the dog. So observation and hands-on skills for sure for a new trainer. And then finding mentors. I wouldn't be where I am today without my mentors. That's for certain. And unfortunately, all of my mentors have sadly passed, or at least the 3, you know, Gail and Julie and Sarah, but they all have impacted my life in such a positive way. And I've really learned so much from them, and my peers too, my colleagues. There's so much to learn. It's endless.
So I also value mentors and don't lean on them likely enough, mainly just because kids and international business. But you mentioned earlier that, you know, the huge value of getting started with dog walking is the opportunity to just get immediate hands-on experience with, and you highlighted some situations where you, whether you know the science or not, or understand how positive reinforcement works or not, you are put in situations where you maybe unintentionally and unstrategically have to play around with the antecedents and consequences and learn through that experience what impact that has on the dog's behavior. And through running Animal Training Academy and being a dad, I spend a lot of my time in my own company and Phoebe's company, who's sat on my lap here. And I sometimes go out there into the training world and realize how blunt your sword can get if you don't keep it sharp, to use a metaphor. And so really appreciated the opportunity recently to lean heavily on a mentor of mine when I was sharply reminded of not keeping my sword sharp. But I just feel there's two things you said there that I thought there would be value in exploring just a little bit more for our audience before we move on to our next topic. And I often think when teaching others, Kim, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the importance of mechanics, the importance of understanding what reinforcement is, how to use it, how to set the environment up for our learners to succeed, how to shape this, that, and the other. But equally important, but potentially defined as softer or not as talked about as much as things like creativity and something you mentioned there, curiosity. I'm just curious. I'm curious about that curiosity that you had as a little kid, and when I think about ACE free work and that opportunity it provides us to observe our learners without placing any expectations on what they're going to do. How has curiosity been, and how is it an important component of your journey and your work today?
I think it's a huge component. And, when I first learned clicker training, and it was through Gail, it was like, that was when it was just free shaping. Like we would just stand there silently and click when the dog got, warmer and warmer until they figured out the criteria. And so it was becoming open-minded to experimenting and trying different things out that, I think really kind of opened up my career and what I was able to learn and discover. For me, problem solving and curiosity, that all kind of just comes naturally. I love problem solving, and I think that's why I like to work with dogs with behavior problems, because it's really so much of this isn't a one size fit all. You can teach a sit easy enough using, whatever technique it is that you're comfortable with. But when it comes to working with a dog that has big feelings or something, you really need to consider the individual dog. So I think that was just, I think it just came naturally to me. And it's hard to tell people you have to be more curious, but I do think experimenting, and that's why like getting your, hands dirty and working with dogs and learning from many other people, asking questions and just sitting and watching. As a baby trainer, I would just go for free and like assist other trainers and, help with their classes. And it was just a way for me to just observe and learn those things. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but I would say that's where the curiosity got me. And then definitely ACE free work is there. It's so observation based. And I love that about it. I tell all my students, like I would like on a Friday night, I'd rather just like sit with a glass of wine and watch my dogs do free work than like watch a movie or something. Like for me, it's just so enjoyable. And then to be able to make small changes to help the dog be more successful in their session. There's just so much to it. And I think that's why I enjoy hiking my dogs also, because I like to just watch them be off leash and do their dog things. And it's a huge part of what I do.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. I'm inspired as someone who's constantly engaged in, like being present, but like the difference between being physically present and being mentally present. My mind's always on.
For sure.
My mind's always on Animal Training Academy and family, and those hikes sound amazing. And a great reminder in today's episode. Moving forward, though, thanks for sharing everything about your journey and
Hmm.
entertaining and engaging with the questions that I pulled out of what you shared. Moving forward, though, I'd really like to talk about some of your work with ACE, Animal Centered Education,
Hmm.
created by the wonderful Sarah Fisher. And I'm really sorry to hear that you've lost your mentors. I didn't know your other two mentors that you mentioned, but was lucky enough to meet Sarah and see her contribution to the animal training and behavior world. We miss her dearly and remain incredibly grateful for her legacy that she's left behind. So much love to her family and for all those that were close to her, um, and your other mentors as well. ACE is something, and you mentioned this briefly, you're going to be presenting on at the upcoming Control Unleashed Conference 2026, organised by the wonderful Leslie McDevitt. And from what I understand, you'll be exploring the combination of ACE Freework and Control Unleashed, which sounds amazing. I was fortunate enough to attend a session with Sarah Fisher and Leslie McDevitt at the PPG conference in the UK in 2024, where they brought ACE and Control Unleashed together in an impromptu session. And it was honestly one of my favorite live demos I think I've ever seen. So to get us started, Kim, I'm going to ask you shortly to share a little bit more about your workshop at this upcoming conference and what attendees to expect. But first, for anyone listening who would like to learn more, the Control Unleashed conference takes place July 31st through August 2nd, and you can attend either in person at Quicksilver Canine in North Carolina or virtually on demand. Head over to conferenceunleashed.com for more information. I say that really slowly because I've got a weird accent and people consistently don't know what I'm saying. But over to you, Kim. Can you tell us a little bit about your presentation and your workshop you're bringing to the Conference Unleashed conference, and then for the listeners who might not be familiar with it, just unpack a little bit more about what ACE Free Work is?
Yeah. So I love this topic. I love combining free work with Control Unleashed. So for those who aren't familiar with ACE free work is essentially it's a number of different stations that we're feeding our dogs from that are set up in a way that is physically comfortable for the dogs. So this would include snuffle mats and lick mats, and then kind of the opportunities from there just are there's so many because we can expand on how we can use kind of scavenging and sniffing as a way for our dogs to enjoy this activity. So we raise the stations in a way that's more comfortable for the dog. If we think of like a raised feeder versus feeding a dog on the ground, a raised feeder allows the dog to maintain balance with their forelegs. So their front legs would be right under their shoulders, their rear legs would be under their hips, and then they don't have to lower their neck and head. And this kind of goes back to when I was a kid and I had hurt myself, and how having neck pain or headaches, how that influences me and what I can physically do. And I can see how much this helps dogs that may have pain or even just discomfort. It doesn't have to be some like traumatic pain, but it allows them to hold their body in a more comfortable way. If a dog were to eat off the ground, they kind of have to like spread their front legs out in an unbalanced way, lower their shoulders, lower their neck, and so forth. So it can create discomfort for them. So by providing this physical comfort, we are then putting the dogs in a more healthy emotional state of mind. So the dog is able to, if it feels more physically comfortable, it feels better emotionally. And then we'll have a number of different stations. So usually like a free work session would have maybe 4 to 8 stations, but you can certainly do even more than that. You can start with less. And we fill them with a number of different foods and then just let our dogs do their thing. So we are not involved. We are completely independent, though you can sit with a glass of wine and watch like I do. And you just let the dog walk around and enjoy. And through free work, we can learn so much about our dog's preferences. So I like to play around with different foods, and I've learned a lot about how the value of crunch and bigger treats can bring our dog's arousal down and calm them, which is really cool. And then by having these raised stations, what we can do is start to get our dogs to practice more proper body movement patterns. So they're holding their body in a more balanced way. They might be using their abdomen slightly, which, straightens out their top line. So we're looking for these little indications that our dogs are starting to use their body better. And it might just be like, I'll see just a shift in weight where a dog will like fix its rear leg so that it's more balanced, or I'll see a moment where its top line will go from roached to straight. And it might go back to roached, but by going straight for a little bit, it's showing me that that dog's body is starting to find a more comfortable way of being and holding itself, releasing tension, all of that. And then by combining it with Control Unleashed, so Control Unleashed, I mostly combine it with our pattern games. Then what I'm doing is I'm using these philosophies to then give the dog food rewards. So if they're playing a pattern, I might do it on a raised snuffle mat. Or I might just use the concept and hold my hand higher rather than placing the food all the way on the ground. So we can use snuffling and licking to slow our dogs down emotionally. So there's like all sorts of ways we can then incorporate free work into how we use Control Unleashed in essentially any sort of training. It doesn't even have to be Control Unleashed, but that's what I'll be speaking about. I hope that's a good enough visual. It's very hard to describe free work without having like pictures and videos.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was thinking that as you were talking, like I didn't know what free work was before going to the PPG summit in 24, and knew Sarah's name, but just it happened. I didn't go there to see Sarah. I think we went there to see Leslie and a few other people. But what a treat! And so for the listeners, my experience was sitting in a circle around Sarah and a bunch of licky mats and snuffle mats set up in various different ways, heights and etc. And then we just let people's dogs in, and Sarah just dictated what she saw, which blew my mind. And then when Leslie jumped in, and we had some, I can't remember what it was, a dog sitting in relation to the way a handler was providing food. And we had the level of analysis where we talked about what was being learned by that dog at an individual moment, and via what we were seeing was just this learning history based on what happened in the last 5 minutes. And we had Sarah pop in and say, yes, and here's what I'm seeing with regards to like the way that dog's foot's positioned and the way the bum is rotated, or I can't remember what it was. They're just some examples. And then they gave us different considerations about how we might set up the training sessions. And what it highlighted for me, Kim, was this whole other area that I just hadn't thought about that existed. And if that dog was uncomfortable, how much that would influence that session and the effectiveness of our training. And it just really became clear how valuable that perspective would be to have on board. And I'm curious, the setups, so you can have your snuffle mats and your licky mats and everything set up. Like logically, that's something that you could replicate quite quickly after watching a video. And obviously there's so many nuances that you'll learn over time to become more skillful at setting those up in different situations. But where does your learning come in, and where does those who learn about ACE, where does the learning come in about what all of the dog's movements then mean once they start to engage all of those? Because for me, like I could set it up, but then I'd be like, I need to call Kim and have her watch this so that she can help me understand what I'm seeing.
I mean, I would say initially, a lot of it is kind of that, having someone support you and help you as you figure out the best setups for your dogs. Sarah, what she saw was beyond anything I could ever imagine seeing. She just had this different way of looking at a being and understanding. I do feel as though I'm getting there, but it takes a lot of observation, practice over and over and over again. But I kind of, when I provide my students with, because I teach this through FDSA now, when I provide my students with information on what to look for, I do kind of break it down to just some simple pieces. And even if we're just looking for that, so it'd be like a straight top line, balanced legs, a softer tail, so a tail that's low. And of course, we have dogs with different tails at different heights, but for your individual dog, what does this look like? And then softness in their face. Like if I'm just looking for those things and I'm seeing them, even if it's little glimpses, then I would say you're on the right track. And it's not always going to be perfect, but it's going to be better than just laying your snuffle mats on the ground. Just put them up on stools and see what happens. So it does take kind of some nuances and some adjustments, but I would say if you're looking for those couple of things, you're getting on the right pathway.
Yeah, and what a legacy that Sarah has left behind. Thank you for continuing on that legacy. For you, the listener, you get questions based on what's been happening recently in Ryan's life, and I think about Sarah, and I think about some recent things happening in my life, and contemplations on this term, the art of training, and what it means to be air quotes an artist, and how useful that is or isn't when we want to. Well, my thinking it was in a team, but where I'm linking it to what Sarah's doing is where it was like Sarah was. I think I can say this in a very short experience I had with observing Sarah. Like she did seemingly have a way, in your words, a way of looking at and understanding the dogs, and that was potentially something that was obviously learned through her experiences, but it seemed that she had some natural intuition in a sense.
Yeah.
Right. And then, I've been thinking about, she was like an artist, you could say. And I've been thinking about the term artistry and as it pertains to working in teams, and how it's great when people have talents and gifts, but in teams, especially when we're thinking about the zoological industry, we need to be able to scale up what we're doing so that everyone that works with the animals can bring the skills and knowledge required to meet the welfare standards that we have in 2026. So artistry is great, and people that have that skill and talent, and we definitely acknowledge it and we think it's wonderful, but we can't scale it in a zoo team. And so what I think Sarah's done that's quite sensational is she's had this natural ability to see these things. But how do you scale that natural ability? And in Sarah's offering, it was ACE free work, and to package that, and to bring that to others and to try to share her skills, and her knowledge in that way. And so that's why I say what a legacy that she's left behind, because she now has people out there teaching her, arguably her innate skills and knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And she was such an amazing teacher. Like she was good at describing things and explaining things and teaching them, but she was also so supportive. Like the number of times when I'd hear her say, just try it. Like she was so supportive of creativity and curiosity and experimentation. And I think that made being her student that much more rewarding, because I never felt held back by her. I only felt pushed forward by her, and supported. So, and she's really what kind of helped me start to experiment with free work in different ways, like through using it for Control Unleashed, and experimenting on my own on how I can utilize it even more. She was very, very supportive in that way, and she does have a lot of great people who are continuing to teach her skills.
And then with regards to that great mentoring and what a gift to have a mentor who facilitates that kind of brave exploration. There is a new area that you've been leaning on your creativity, your ACE experience, your Control Unleashed experience to explore and play around with. And I think when we caught up a few weeks ago, you described this area that you've been exploring as one that's just jumping around in your head, and you've been asking your learning partners, your dogs and your students, to play around with this idea that's been jumping around in your head, and you're calling it opt-out stations. And this is, I think, a great opportunity for us to talk about ACE free work and kind of creativity, where they come together, and this new idea. And I said to you, I think when we caught up earlier, Kim, I just love hearing people and learning from people when they're this fresh into exploring a new idea, because they can't really see what they know that others don't yet, because it's still so fresh to them. So this is such a great part in your journey to ask you to share about this with our audience, I think. So can you share about when we say opt-out stations and when we're thinking about ACE free work, what that means and how this idea came about and how you've been using it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to decide if opt-out stations is the proper name for it, because I think opt-out has maybe a negative connotation for people. But this actually came about with a discussion with Sarah. I was telling her how my newest dog, so this was about 2 years ago, she was a puppy, Sunday, and I helped to raise her litter. She was a very emotional little puppy. And so she came to me just for like the beginning of life skills before she moved on to her official family. And of course, that ended in that Sunday lives with me. And I fell in love pretty quickly with her. So with Sunday, I'm very accustomed to, in general, I pick dogs that could do sports with me and tend to have, more of that sports work ethic that we look for. Sunday did not have that. And she would just walk away from me during training sessions, which is something I had never experienced before. And quite honestly, it hurt my feelings a lot. And so I focused a lot on my relationship with her and free work. She started with free work as a baby puppy. Like the day I brought her home, and she wasn't very, foodie. And I used ACE free work to really build a lot of, an appetite for her, just for her general meals, and in training. So one time I was working with her, and I had a free work station set up with a snuffle mat, and she, I can't remember what I was asking her to do. And she did a couple reps, and then she walked away from me and went to the snuffle mat. So I'm like, okay, I'll try not to cry over that one. And I just followed her and filled the station, went back and just waited for her. And so then she comes back to me. We did a couple reps, and then she went to the snuffle mat. We did that a few times. And I found that over that period of, that one session, I was getting more and more reps from her when she was able to go to the snuffle mat whenever she wanted to. And so I mentioned it to Sarah. And of course, Sarah starts geeking out and I start geeking out, and we just start like getting each other all excited. And she's like, play around with this. Let's see what you can do. And so I did. I played around with it a lot with Sunday, and I convinced some of my dog friends to play around with it as well. And I even tried it with my more work-driven dog, Jane, and I saw really good results. And the thing was, I kind of couldn't explain why it was working, because, to me, it was like, okay, I understand the dog can choose to leave at any point, and maybe that makes it more reinforcing to come back into work. But like, what the heck is actually going on? And so I have some friends that are, I have a friend who does applied behavior analysis. Um, Eileen Anderson she's my writing editor. And so she geeks out a lot with the ABA stuff. And so I reached out to the two of them and they sent me down this rabbit hole. And that's where I learned about consent versus assent and degrees of freedom. And that kind of started to explain it all to me. I think Hannah McGee, you interviewed her a while ago, and she described all of this probably significantly better than I could ever describe it. But for those listening, if we think of consent, often consent is kind of a frequently used word in the dog training world. And, it goes along with start buttons and cooperative care and that kind of thing. If we look at the ABA definition of consent, it's a one-time agreement to something, and it's an agreement by an adult or a guardian. Whereas assent, so ASSENT, that is for someone who cannot consent. So a child, and in my argument, a dog. And assent is also the ongoing voluntary agreement and willingness of a learner to participate. And to me, that was what I found more appealing, because it was ongoing, continuous, and willingness. Like, I don't want my dog to just agree to something. I want them to willingly agree to something. And so learning about that really helped me. And then I learned more about degrees of freedom, which again, listen to Hannah's interview because it's going to describe this way better. But essentially, if we're feeding a dog food for, let's say we're trying to get our dog to sit, we have food in our hand. The only way that the dog can earn that food is by sitting, then they have no degree of freedom. So basically, the only way you can earn reinforcement through food is by sitting. If we had an alternative way for them to earn food, so in my case, go to a snuffle mat, or it could be as simply as, if you sit or lie down, I will give you this food, then that gives the dog 1 degree of freedom. And then we can kind of build up from there as far as how many degrees of freedom there are. But essentially, a degree of freedom is a second pathway to reinforcement, and the same reinforcement. So it would be equal value food. So once I kind of learned all that, it started to explain things better to me. And I, looked into some studies that showed that these degrees of freedom, mostly with children, not so much, there's not a ton of studies with animals, and how it helps with their learning. And that's when I kind of was like, okay, so I can actually have a way to explain this, or at least explain it the best that I can. So that's kind of, I guess that was the beginning of my opt-out station journey.
And we love Eileen Anderson here at Animal Training Academy. She's been a part of our community for quite a while. And so was it our podcast with Hannah that helped you quite a bit on this part?
It was, I actually saw a presentation from her prior to the podcast, but it was Eileen who sent me the podcast too. And
nice.
Eileen sends me anything that has anything to do with degrees of freedom or assent. She knows that I geek out over it. And she's actually helped me a lot with coming up with my content for this, and helping me understand it. So Eileen has been a huge part of this for me. Another mentor.
So what a great one. So in your words, what is happening with degrees of freedom? How does this help with your opt-out stations, and maybe go a little bit deeper into how the listeners can set this up in their training? I'm already thinking about examples in my life.
Yeah. So Okay, so if I'm going to use Sunday as an example, my puppy, one thing I noticed with her was that she was very tentative to learning how to follow a lure. Okay, so like a lure is in putting food on her nose and she stays on the treat while I lure her either into a position or to move forward or whatever it was. And it, to me, it seemed as though she was perceiving it as coercion or a bribery or whatever you might call it. But she was sensitive to whether or not she was actually going to get that food lure. And now I know how to break down teaching a lure without getting the dog to have those feelings, right? So, okay, I'm going to make it easier for you. But it gave me information about who she was, that she was sensitive to this perceived coercion. And so by telling the dog, well, you can earn the same food just by going over to the snuffle mat, you're decreasing the level of coercion there. And I don't mean coercion as like some horrible thing that's happening. It just happens in training if we're using food. And I don't think anyone is a bad trainer for using just one food to ask the dog to sit. This just gives them more choice and control. And that then makes them feel better about opting into the training because Sunday knows at any point, if I start to feel pressure to do the thing, I can just walk away and relieve that pressure and still get the food. Another good example, or at least in my opinion, an example would be, we teach start button behaviors. And I love start button behaviors. I love geeking out with them. Voluntary sharing, a control unleashed skill, is like one of my favorite skills to teach. And the thing that I always questioned was, so the idea of the start button is the dog performs the behavior, you do the thing. Okay, so let's say we're just using a start button to clean the dog's ears. So the dog does a chin rest, I clean their ears, and then I feed them out of position so that they can offer the chin rest again, which means they're opting in, they're consenting to the thing. The thing is, we don't really help the dog understand what saying no looks like. And we also, in a lot of procedures I've seen, we don't feed for that no. Now, there are procedures out there where you do. So what that would look like is the dog, let's say they do their chin rest, you start moving towards their ear and they raise their chin. That's the dog saying, can you please stop? And we should feed that, because if we don't, then we're saying the only way you can earn reinforcement is if you agree to the thing. And that's where we start to get into our potential coercion. So what I started doing with the opt-out stations is I would just have an opt-out station there. So it's very clear to the dog that they can say no just by going to the opt-out station. So it's not the dog second guessing it. And it's also not the human second guessing it. Because what I see a lot with these start button behaviors is, let's say the dog lowers their chin and then lifts it, then the handler might like just pull back and wait, right? Because they're waiting for the dog to say yes. And so now we're telling the dog, well, the only way you can earn the food is by saying yes. The other thing that I always have questioned is how long, what's the amount of time between one rep to the next where we can actually say the dog's saying no? Okay, so the dog does her chin rest. I clean her ear. I feed her out of position. 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, 4 second, 5 second. When do I say, oh, she's saying no, as opposed to I'm going to wait this out until she does another chin rest? And, there's just a lack of clarity there. And the opt-out station gives us that clarity, because the dog can do their rep, get their ear cleaned, and say, wait a minute, I got to process this for a moment. I'm going to go snuffle. We feed them, and then they come back. And again, I'm finding, I taught a class on this through Fenzi Dog Sports Academy. And it's like every dog just embraces this. And I have so many people ask, well, what if my dog just stays at the snuffle mat, right? Like, my dog loves food. They're just going to stay at the snuffle mat. And I've yet to see that happen. I can't explain that yet. And that's why this is like that idea that's bouncing around in my head, but it has yet to happen. And I've just seen dogs just really, really embrace this. And it's not just dogs like Sunday who's sensitive to the potential of coercion. I work with a lot of sports dogs, and I had one in particular. It was this toller named Presto, and he was a high-level agility dog. And during training and at trials, he would just bark and bark and bark and just push his handler to go fast, fast, fast. And he also started to, like, she was having problems with him going through the weave poles and those kinds of things because he just couldn't settle himself. He was just so high. And so we started using the opt-out station, and we incorporated into Control Unleashed. And it was like, as soon as we incorporated an opt-out station into the training sessions, the barking stopped. Because he just, instead of barking, he would just opt out. And then he started to realize, oh, I can opt out if I get frustrated. So I have that opportunity. And so then the barking, just the overall frustration went away, and the barking went away. It was amazing. And then I taught an in-person workshop down in Tennessee last weekend. And we had this big dog, Swagger. He's like I don't know, he looked like a Rottweiler Beauceron mix. Like, this dog was huge, really bad history. And he was having a hard time focusing and learning anything, really. And so I went and I got a snuffle mat. I had already taught all the students free work. And I said, just leave this in here. Every time he goes to it, just go feed him. I can't help it now, because whenever I see a dog struggling, I'm like, just get him an opt-out station. So we put the snuffle mat in there, and it was as expected. Like, he was opting out a lot, going to the snuffle mat. And then suddenly he was engaging with his handler, and he was learning these skills. And he was fine then. Then he was a good learner. He was able to handle the environment because he knew that he could opt out at any time. And I think what bugs me about the name opt-out station is because I think that it makes us humans feel like the dog is just leaving us, right? They're opting out of working with us. And I don't think that's always the case. My dog, Jane, now she's 7 years old. She's a rough collie also. And she's my dog that's like really, really into working. And I love it. And so she'll just keep going and going and going. But what I do find is that her fluency deteriorates over time. And in addition to that, she does have some reactivity, big feelings about the environment. And what I've discovered is I've done so much Control Unleashed with her. And what she does is she gets so fixated on the work that she essentially blocks out the environment. And then when I stop any sort of food rewards and reinforcement, then she takes in the environment and has big feelings. She's not actually processing the environment. And I know for me as a learner, I was diagnosed just a few years ago with ADHD, and it kind of explained so much to me about my entire life. I am the kind of person who I work really hard. I have general anxiety, but if I get myself focused on work, it kind of makes all that the other stressors go away, right? And I think a lot of us do that. And I think some of our dogs do too. And for me, when I'm learning something, sometimes I just need time to like take a moment and process it, right? Whether it's like just a pause in the learning and I think about what I listened to, or I might go back and read it again, or just take a break, walk outside, get a cup of coffee and come back to learn. And to me, that's not me opting out of learning. It's just me taking time to process what I've learned. And what I discovered is I didn't think that Jane would ever leave a training session, and she would. She started to go to the snuffle mat. And I realized that she was just using those opportunities to process what we were working on. And then all of a sudden, just things became more fluent. She learned more quickly because she felt comfortable to say, wait a minute, I need a moment here. Either you keep making things too hard, or I am not quite sure I understand this. And it really helped our relationship when it came to training. And then ultimately, it has helped her a ton with processing the environment, just as like a nice side benefit. She's just now starting to take the time out of, let's say, a Control Unleashed pattern to just look around and feel comfortable with doing that. So that's been really cool too, to play around with and discover.
So are you teaching the Opt-out, in the opt-out station, you're just using snuffle mats?
For the most part, yeah. I'm just using a raised snuffle mat. So I'm incorporating the ACE station into it. And if the dog prefers licking, you can do that.
And so the dog learns about the raised snuffle mat outside of the whatever training you're using it in, and then it's essentially a cue to come over to the snuffle mat, get food, and you just pick that cue up, put it in your other training session. So the dog's got some pretty salient information about whether it wants to engage in interacting with you in that moment or go and do this learned behavior in order to access reinforcement over here.
Yeah, exactly. So what I like to do, ideally, I'm teaching the dog the concept of the raised snuffle mat through a free work session. Because over time, we notice with free work, like the dog's energy comes down, their arousal comes down. Some dogs get very amped up by snuffle mats. If someone is more into training a behavior than just letting free work do the magic, I do show my students how to teach calm snuffling in the way of just kind of doing one treat at a time and then slowly going up from there. So basically what we're looking to do is first just create calmness and happiness and engaged snuffling separate from incorporating it into our training sessions. I don't want to take a snuffle mat that a dog's going to pick up and shake and then use that as the opt-out station. That's just going to get messy for everyone. And it's really not building in those good feelings that I want. And we can definitely teach. I've seen dogs that, devour food off of snuffle mats or pick up and shake snuffle mats. We can teach them to snuffle calmly before we use it. And then usually what I'll do is I'll have a student have the raised snuffle mat somewhere in the training area and start by asking the dog for just some simple cues that they know. And then every 4 or so reps, have them fill the snuffle mat and then wait for the dog to return. And then we'll kind of just build from there.
Well, I could just keep exploring my curiosity, but I looked at the time and I realized we have been going for a decent hour. So
okay,
I think we should head towards wrapping up. But can you just share with everyone listening before we do, Kim, where they can go online to learn more from you, share your Fenzi Dog Sport Academy courses and Blue Dog training?
Yeah. So my local business is Blue Dog. So it's bluedogpetcare.com. And then you can find all my classes on Fenzi Dog Sports Academy website, or I do have my own website, kimpalermo.com, which has a link to all of that as well.
You're one step in front of me. It's been on my to-do list for years. But then Ryan Cartlidge, the photographer in Canada, has ryancartlidge.com.
Oh.
And of course, you can learn from Kim at the Control Unleashed conference, July 31st through August 2nd, which you can find out more about at conferenceunleashed.com. Well, let's end there for today, just because of the time and people are probably coming to the end of their commutes where they listen to podcasts or train rides or mowing lawns or whatever you're doing. We appreciate you listening to us, listener, and thank you for tuning into the ATA podcast show. And thank you, Kim, so much for everything you're doing to improve the lives of learners everywhere and for taking the time to come and hang out with us at Animal Training Academy. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
And thank you so much for listening as well. This is your host, Ryan Cartlidge, signing off from this episode of the Animal Training Academy podcast show. We hope today's conversation inspired you and equipped you with new tools for your trainer's toolbox. Remember, every challenge in training is an opportunity to learn and sharpen your animal training geekery. Embrace the rough patches, learn from them, and keep improving. And don't forget, the path to growing your skills and expanding your knowledge continues beyond this episode. Visit www.atamember.com to join our supportive membership, where you will find a community of trainers just like you. Together, we're making a huge positive difference in the lives of animal and human learners worldwide. Until next time, keep honing your skills. Stay awesome. And remember, every interaction with an animal or human learner is your opportunity to create ripples. We're here cheering you on every step of the way. See you at the next episode.